Everybody, my name is Injie Guo. I'm a professor of Chinese studies and one of the deputy directors of the China Studies Center at the University of Sydney. It's in the afternoon in Sydney. I'm not sure where you are. If you are in China, it's still afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. If you are in other places, good morning. It's a great pleasure today to have Mr. Vic Petersen talking about Confucius, a very important topic. But before the event begins, I would like to acknowledge the country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognize their continued connection to the land, water, and culture. I'm currently on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eroa Nation and pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. I further acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which you are and pay respects to their elders past, present, and future. Now, Mr. Vic Petersen has been in China for a long time, for many years, and teaches Chinese language. His works include Lunyu Analysis, A History of Chinese Moral Arts Fiction, Ease into Chinese, three character classic, and the popular character learning game Dui Dui or Kitablo. So he has been quite prolific and he's done a lot of fantastic work. Today, he's going to talk about Confucius and Confucianism. I really admire his courage. He's one of the very few in the world who has the courage to translate Confucius, well, the Analects. It's probably one of the most difficult things to translate. And he'll have plenty to say about that. Without further ado, over to you, Vic.
Okay, thank you, Professor Guo. I'd first of all like to thank the Sydney China Studies Center and Professor Guo and Yinping Zhang, especially for organizing this talk. I'll just share my screen. Okay, the talk today is on how Confucius's philosophy differs from later Confucian tradition and how that affects our understanding of China's past, present, and future in 30 minutes. And it's the conclusions from my translation of Lunyu, which is the Analects that Professor Guo just mentioned. When we say Confucianism, what we're talking about, of course, are the ideas of Confucius, or the philosophy of Confucius, or Kongzi, as he's known in Chinese. He lived around 500 BC. But we also use the word Confucianism to refer to the ideas of later thinkers, such as Zhu Xi, who died in 1200 AD. So he was living 1,600 years after Confucius, and yet we're calling both these things Confucianism. And the idea of this talk today is to show that there are differences, quite significant differences between the two, and they're not actually coming from the same basis. This is my book, Lunyu Analysis, which I translated. It contains 3 parts. It contains the actual translation of it. It's not arranged in vertical order, this thing, in the actual book itself, but it's a translation where I try to make sense of the language. And what I'm actually looking at is what Confucius said. And then each of the passages, there are 500 passages that make up Lunyu. And I've gone through and analyzed each one of them, trying to make sense of the passage. So this section is asking, why did he say it? And the third section is, there's an explanation of the philosophy, where I try to put it together as a complete philosophy. And that asks the question, what does it all mean? And the 3 of them have to go together. What it means, why did he say it, and what he actually said, almost makes sense together. So the translation was difficult because you have to keep on readjusting everything through it as your understanding of the philosophy deepens. So the way I actually did the translation was to take the work of Zhu Xi, who's the person I mentioned before, dying in 1200 AD, and use his interpretation to understand Lunyu. So what I'm doing here is I'm not actually trying to get my understanding of Lunyu across, but rather to put his understanding of Lunyu into English. And the reason I do that is to actually get the richest and most full understanding of the original text as possible. So he's done an amazing job getting all the information together and analyzing the original philosophy. But once you put it in there, you turn back and look at what Zhu Xi is saying, and you can see that there are differences in their perspective of the world. So what I'm looking at today is I'm looking at two things. One is Confucius's original philosophy, and the other thing is the later tradition. And for his original philosophy, we've really only got one thing, and that is the things that he said, which are collected in the book Lunyu, or the Analects. And that's the book I've translated. For the later tradition, there's a lot of information there, and we really have to cut it down to some sort of manageable size. And what I've done to do that is to start with Zhu Xi's book, writing about his understanding of Confucius, and that's called Lunyu Jizhu. And then the second thing is the book Three Character Classic, which is a book for children, and that's what everyone in China was originally learning before they started school. And it just laid out a very clear framework for everything that people will be learning in the future. The third thing I use is the modern understandings of Chinese tradition, which is to say now we're a little bit removed from the tradition and all the unimportant information is falling away, and what we're left with are the real key structures which are there in this later tradition. So let's first have a look at traditional Chinese society. Now, this is a very simple model I've got for understanding Chinese society, or the traditional Confucian view of Chinese society. And what it says here is, if you look at yourself as a person within this Chinese society, you belong in two spheres. One is the family sphere, and the other one is your social sphere. And you're the link between the two. So your social sphere is separate from your family sphere. They operate in two different ways. You're the thing that brings the two together. Within each of those two spheres, there are four roles that you can be in. In the family, you can be a child or you can be a parent. And within the society sphere, you can be a boss or a subordinate. So what you've got is a role which is actually defined by the other people who are in the group with you. So when you're in your family group, you don't actually have a role until there's someone else in the group. So when your parents are in the group, you're a child. And when your children are in the group, you act as a parent. And each of those roles has got a set of obligations and ways of acting. And you're not really confined to one of those things. You actually move through them during your life cycle. So you move from a child to a parent, from a subordinate to a boss. So these are roles that you've got. But the way that you act is determined by who's in there with you. So even if you're the big boss of a company, if someone who's a bigger boss of the company comes along, you're immediately a subordinate, and your role is to act as a subordinate. So there's a set of rules that you act to, a set of obligations. And behind those obligations, I should say this is also the basis of what's happening in China, Japan and Korea and Vietnamese traditional society. Behind those obligations or those roles, there's a philosophy. And the philosophy expressed in sort of like a modern day slogan is respect older people and love younger people. That's Sun Lao, Ai Yo. So that's one of the sayings that's happening at the moment. For the society sphere, I'm using an older saying which comes from the Three Character Classic: serve the ruler above and benefit the people below. So there's a philosophy behind it of how you should be operating, of what you're doing. Now, what that is, this is the way that I sort of look at the whole of society, the basis of traditional Chinese society, and that is it's based upon the concept of a moral hierarchy. And the way the moral hierarchy works is this. when two people meet, they work out if they've got a relationship. And what their relationship will be based upon whether one of them is a superior or an inferior, a family member or not a family member. And the people fall into this structure, which is to say, if you're superior to them, they'll start treating you with these obligations that are part of the role that the subordinate must play. So if I meet someone who's a boss, I treat them like a boss, and that's how to act morally with them. I'm fulfilling my obligations. That immediately generates a hierarchy. To be moral, I have to put that person above me. So the morality creates the hierarchy. So my actions will put people into a position of either above me or below me. And then the hierarchy also creates the morality, because when we're in the hierarchy, I know how to treat the other people. So it's a self-perpetuating thing. The whole idea of this traditional Chinese society, from my viewpoint, is we're working out how to deal with other people. And we deal with other people by treating them either as a superior or an inferior. And there are all sorts of obligations and ways of acting that we must do. And when I was in China, I was teaching some of these things, some of the ways that you act when you're with a superior and inferior. And they're things that have to be learned. It's sort of like a moral or a set of obligations, moral code. Now, what this does is it generates a whole society, which is very layered. So when two people meet, they work out who's above them. But when you have all the people in society meeting, it becomes one layer upon another. And what I've done here is I've just shown how many different classes could come up. This isn't an actual set amount. It'll be different from different perspectives. But you'd have a ruler at the top, the ministers, officials, upper class people, middle class, lower class, peasants and classless, going from the top to bottom of society. So the whole of society forms into these very structured and a very rigid society. So traditional Chinese society is based on the idea of morals. It's got very rigid morality, and the rigid morality goes together with a set of obligations. So you have to act in a certain way with superiors, and you act in a certain way with inferiors. And the way that you act depends on who you're with at that particular moment. So you're continually adjusting the way you act depending on who's around. It's got rigid morality, it's got a rigid social structure, and it's formalistic in that the obligations that you do, the bowing and the different sets of behaviors, are not things which you can change at will. They're things which have been set into tradition. Now, just as a comparison, there's also another set of codes which hasn't been used very much in Chinese history, but it has been used at the very start of the Chinese Empire and at the very end. And that's more authoritative, totalitarian style of rule that I'm calling legalist, because that's the way some people have described it, a legalist style of rule. And during the Cultural Revolution, this was actually put into play as a way of breaking the old traditional Confucian structure. Confucian structure is a very strated society and very rigid. And during the Cultural Revolution, the government attempted to get rid of all that structure and to make everyone more equal and to make everyone directly reporting to the person at the top. So the person at the top would serve the people below, and the people would respond by following them. And within the actual people, there was this idea of continuous revolution, which is to say, all the people who are at the top of society were put down at the bottom. All the people at the bottom went to the top. And the continuous revolution is each time people start getting to the top and start becoming part of this old Confucian structure, they'd be brought down again. So that was what was happening earlier. And today we've actually got what I consider to be a hybrid model. That is, it's got elements of the legalist style, which is to say that there's not a whole lot of layers in between the very bottom and the very top of society. It's rather unlayered, but it does have layers within it. So there are rich people, ordinary people, and poor people. And what happens is the government will make some ad hoc adjustments every now and then to make sure that there's not these great structures forming in there. So maybe that's what was happening with some of the adjustments that have been made in recent years of clearing out some of the billionaires, among other things. And there's always this background thing saying that we might move on to a more revolutionary model. So it's keeping the keeping the Confucian structures away in some way, but allowing parts of them to come back in again. So let's have a quick look at how this morality system that I just mentioned, which is the traditional morality system, how that compares with what Kongzi says on morality. And this is one of the quotes which I think is a very important one from the book. There are 500 passages. This is one of the ones which I think expresses his view of morality quite clearly. He says, the ethics of the leader are the wind, and the ethics of the little people are the grass. The little people, of course, are just the ordinary people. When the wind blows on the grass must bend to it. Now, this is an important passage because it's actually Kongzi quoting King Cheng, and he's quoting Zhou Gong. And King Cheng was the second king of the Zhou dynasty, which is the dynasty that Kongzi was living under. Confucius was living under this particular dynasty. It had been set up 500 years before, and this is how it was set up. So what we're actually looking at is the way that the state was actually set up and the way that he thinks a well-managed state is set up. So he thinks this is the sort of like key to morality, the moral system that Zhou Gong implemented to help King Cheng run the state. And what he says is the wind blows on the grass. So what we've got there is the leader is blowing wind on the people. The ethics of the leader from the leader come down to the people. So what we can see here is it's a very different sort of structure from the most key structure of traditional Chinese society. The traditional society is based on the idea that morality and hierarchy go together. And it's one of the key things that the later thinkers tried to show was happening with Lunyu, with the book about Confucius, that China's always had this situation where morality is creating a hierarchy. It's a very moral country. Whereas what Confucius is actually saying is the opposite. He says the people actually don't have ethics until the government gives them ethics. There is a leader, and the ethics that the people have come from the leader. If the leader blows a good wind, the people will be good. If the leader blows bad wind, the people will be bad. So the people themselves don't have any ethics. They're all determined by the leader. And therefore, you can see that ethics actually come after the leader. You have to have a leader, a government structure, to have these ethics that they're talking about. So the very thing which is key to the tradition, this idea of morality or ethics, is actually not key in Confucius's idea. The key here is that there's a leader and a government structure before that. So I'll just show a little bit more. Here's another quote which is saying the same sort of thing. Kongzi said, if leaders are upright, without issuing orders, the people will do as they should. If not upright, they will not be followed, even if they issue orders. So what this is saying is that the whole of the structure, this hierarchy where people are following each other, will actually break down if the leader doesn't act properly. So it's not a permanent structure. It's a structure that has to be renewed all the time by the leader. So this is key to what Kongzi is saying and what Confucius' original theory was. And here's another one, which is another one. This is from 13.13 of the book. And he says, Kongzi says, if you are upright, what is difficult about governing? If you are not upright, how can you make others upright? So here it's looking at morality. And he says the moral system all depends upon the leader. If the leader doesn't have morality, the morality just disappears. So in these two quotes, firstly, we have the hierarchy disappearing if the leader's not doing the right thing. And then the second thing is the morality disappears if the leader doesn't do the right thing. So what he's saying is that it's the leader who's doing everything. And it's putting a lot of pressure upon the leader to be doing the right thing to make everything work. Now, these two passages, as I said before, Zhu Si, who's the guy who died in 1200, he's the important guy. He's the most famous of all the scholars of the past 2,000 years. And he did an excellent job in this book. He made comments on every section in the book, except for this section and the one before. And there are two other ones in the next chapter which he didn't make comments on as well. But these two statements, which I consider to be very clear indications of the idea that the hierarchy and the morality is not permanent, are the two sections that he didn't actually come in and say anything about. So we don't actually know what his view on it was or why he didn't comment on these two, but it seems unusual that out of 500, he's not commenting on the ones which I consider to be very key in showing that the philosophy is actually different from what he's talking about. So what I see is Kong's view on ethics is that ethics exist, but whether people follow them depends on how government leaders behave. So there is such a thing as right and wrong, but whether people are doing it depends on what the government's doing. If the government's behaving properly, the people behave properly. But the people themselves, the morals that they have, are not real morality. And when you look at what Confucius is saying, what Kong is saying, he's repeatedly saying that people don't have morals which are any good, and it needs the leaders to give them proper morals for them to be real morality. So Lunyu is not primarily about morality. Instead, it's about a mysterious force that is the framework upon which society is built. So what is this mysterious force that holds society together? Now, some people have said that in the book there's this mysterious force called the Dao, or the way. But when you actually look at what Kongzi says about Dao, he calls it the path. He says, who can leave without going through the door? Why then don't they follow the path? Now, what he's saying is he likes to put this metaphor in that his house is like the philosophy. People come in through the front door and they go out again. They climb the stairs as they get higher and higher into the actual philosophy itself. But when he talks about a path going out, he's not talking about some mysterious way. He's talking about the actual philosophy. Follow the philosophy. That's the path. So when we say something like, find the path over the hill, we're talking about one path. There's only one way across. If you say find the way over the hill, which isn't what Kunz is saying, he's not talking about find the way. That means just any way across the hill. There are thousands of different ways. He's talking about something which is very defined, and that's what he's teaching. He's teaching the path. He's showing the way. This Dao. It's not a mysterious force. It's his philosophy. So what is the mysterious force that holds society together? Let's have a look at it. It's legitimacy or authority. So there's this imaginary force that generates and maintains hierarchies in society. It exists in your mind. It exists in the minds of people. It's invisible, but you can see it. You can see who's got authority, but you can't actually see the lines of authority holding it together. But we can actually visualize it as threads coming from above. So here are the threads holding the society together. So in a two-tier society like what we had in Europe in the past, where there's a ruler and the people who are ruled, the people who are being ruled have a connection to the ruler. They believe that the ruler's legitimate. And when you ask, why is the king legitimate? Who made the king legitimate? It's the fact that everyone believes him to be legitimate, that he is legitimate. So there's this thing that's coming from the king to the people and making them believe in his legitimacy. And we draw them as these lines when we do graphs or charts. Now, what Kongzi was talking about, key to his idea is that a two-tier model doesn't work well. He says that there must be a bureaucracy that's separate from the ruler. So when the bureaucracy is just doing what the ruler says, it's not able to look after the people. It's only doing what the ruler says. It's the ruler's tool for getting what he wants. But what Kongzi actually says is the bureaucracy balances the ruler's wants with the people's needs. So it has to be separate. It has to be looking after both of them. It turns autocracy into democracy. So what they're doing is, by having a bureaucracy between the ruler and the people, the ruler gets what they want and the people get what they need. It can only happen if the bureaucracy is semi-independent of the ruler, doing things for both sets of the people. So what we've got is a society which has got three levels in it. There's a bureaucracy, which is his main focus, and there's the ruler and the people, all held together by this idea of legitimacy, not a morality system. So when the bureaucracy looks after the people, what it does is it strengthens the ruler's legitimacy in the minds of the people. The people love the ruler because the ruler is supplying everything they need. It's making their society so nice. So because the ruler's making their society seem nice, they respect the ruler. So it's a very simple transaction there. The ruler does the bureaucracy makes it look like the ruler's doing everything the people need. And that's making the people feel very happy with the government, and they don't want to change it. And that's its source of legitimacy and its authority. So how does the bureaucracy do this? How do they have a successful government? And what Confucius is saying is that the most important thing is this idea of empathy, or zhen. Now, in Chinese, there are two words, zhen. There is one word that probably everyone knows, which is the word for person. So zhen, this character here, means person. But there's a different character, zhen, same pronunciation, written differently, which means something different. It's made up of the word for two plus person. So it's something which is connected between two people. It's a relationship between two people. It doesn't exist within anyone unless there's another person there. So it's a relationship that only comes into existence when there are two people. You can't feel zhen unless there's another person there. So this is the meaning of empathy. Empathy is what you feel, what you share between two people. It's that bond between you of closeness and of love, which is the translation there in Chinese. Sangjin Sang'ai. So the idea is that this zhen, this thing between you, brings you two together and holds you two together. So that's what he's talking about. He's talking about this as the magic thing. And all through his book, he's always talking about empathy. You need empathy. So what does this mean? You've got a bureaucracy that's empathetic. And why is that useful? It's useful because what the bureaucracy needs to always ask itself is, what would I do? What would I want from me if I was the ruler? And what would I expect from me if I were the people? So the bureaucracy has to be able to put itself into the position of the people above it and the position of the people below it. And they use this empathy to make themselves feel what the other people feel so that they can provide what they want or what they need. And because they can do that, because they can feel what people want, because they're very empathetic people, they can supply what's required. So it's not a set of obligations, as in the later tradition, but it's a feeling that you have, what people would want from you as the government. So what we have in Kong's philosophy, and this looks the same as the one that we saw before, in the family situation, the older people want you to respect them, love your parents. The younger people want love from their mother and father. Respect your parents and love the younger people. Serve the ruler and benefit below. It's what we had before. But what's different is who's doing it. In Kong's theory, the bureaucracy does that because it's coming between the people and the ruler, and that's how it runs the society. But in the later tradition, it's pushing it onto the people. And they're actually doing what the bureaucracy would be doing. The later tradition has the people doing what the bureaucracy was designed to do. But if the people are doing what the bureaucracy was designed to do, what's the bureaucracy doing? The people are being all nice and respectful, but the bureaucracy is not doing that. It's not looking after them. So that's the question that's happening here. Now, some people say that what Kongzi was actually saying was that the family is like the state. The father will be like the ruler, and the children will be like the minister. But when you see what Kongzi actually says, he says the ruler rules, the minister ministers, the parent parents, and the child behaves as a child. So this is how he talks about what people should be doing. He says that everyone should be doing these things. And what everyone should be doing is exactly what they should be doing. He says that the parent should act as a parent. The child should act as a child. He's not saying that the parent should act as a ruler or the child should act as a person. He doesn't say that. And if he doesn't say that, he probably doesn't mean it. So what we've got is a different structure. We've got here him saying very clearly that the state should be doing these things. The minister should be looking after the people, not the people looking after themselves, not them being moral, but the people should be, but the state should be acting morally. So his idea is that for the state to be stable, for society to be stable, the government must look after the people. But in the later tradition, it says rigid morality and hierarchy make the society stable. So I've got a very different basis for starting. What we have in China at the moment is the idea that traditionally the society was very rigid, very solid. But when we go back and look at the philosophical foundation for that, which is the book Lunyu, the work of the words of Confucius, we see that he's not saying that at all. He's saying that the government must look after the people, and that's what makes society stable. So, just summing up here, what Kongzi was actually saying was that what's important is relationships based on empathy, and you need to have people acting normally. The government exists for the people, and the bureaucracy is there to meet the needs and wants, needs of the rulers' wants and the people's needs. And through that, the government becomes legitimate because it's doing what people want. It rules by the will of the people. The people want this government because it's so good. And the stability of the state is the result of good government. But in the later tradition, what we have is as relationships based on obligation. So we've basically got rid of the feeling of empathy. There's no empathy, but obligation instead. We have a very oppressive morality. Everyone's doing what they have to do. And that causes society to become rigid, highly stratified. The government is comprised of academically and morally educated men, and that becomes the highest form of society, the highest stratum of society. So instead of being there to serve the people, it's actually ruling over the people. And then the government's aim is merely to keep the society stable. It's not to provide for people and through that you have stability, but it's there to do the least that is necessary to keep society functioning. So just in conclusion, this is my last slide here. China and Japan, Korea and Vietnam, all the ones which are Confucian countries, were influenced by later Confucian tradition. So in the past 1,000 years, most of it has been based on this later idea that society is made up of obligations between people based on their social position and also their family position. But what's actually happening is morality has been put in. If we take it from Kongzi's position, from Confucius's philosophy, and look at what's actually going on, it would seem that morality is a tool that's been used to give the morality enforcers, who are these academics or scholars, to give them power over the other people. So instead of serving the people are holding themselves in position, and that's giving them power because they're enforcing this morality over other people. So that's the way we can see that's the way that we can look at traditional China to see what was happening in the past. And today we can see that Confucianism, for instance, in China has been criticized quite widely. And what people see as the things that they dislike most of it are the elements that are not part of his original philosophy. So the morality, the social structure, elitism, classism, sexism, these are things that people don't like. And these are things which, when we look at his philosophy, aren't actually part of it. So the question that I think needs to be asked is, if he's got this idea that a caring government is a powerful and legitimate authoritative government, can that somehow be brought into what's happening in the world today in different governments? So they're just some ideas which I'm leaving you with. So thank you very much.